This is the young man whose photograph I encountered in Denmark when I was doing the research for the book, and who became the model for the character of Peter in the book, the resistance fighter who was executed. Both of these young guys were among those young men who were killed, and this is the place where they were killed, tied to these posts and shot and buried in unmarked graves. If you go to this place in Copenhagen now, there is a statue there of a mother holding the body of her son, and every day the Danish people put fresh flowers at the base of that statue. They're very proud of that bit of history, that what the Danish people did in 1943. I guess I have time to read this. I've gotten so many letters over the years from people of all ages about this book, but this is a special one. Dear Miss Lowry, I read Number the Stars for the first time in 4th grade. Our teacher assigned us books and made us create a group project after we were through. I read the book in 2 nights, fell in love with it. When the time came to come up with a project, we all decided we would be excluded. She's referring to her small group of kids. We would be excluded from normal activities for one day of school, and we would see how it felt and write a report on it afterward. I thought it would be easy because it would be pretending, and it would only be one day. The first thing we were made to do was sit apart from everyone at our own table. We weren't allowed milk at milk break, and we couldn't have snacks. In music class, we weren't allowed to play recorders. We were made to sit in the back of the class. Things like this went on throughout the day, our teacher playing along, putting us at the back of lines, calling us last after we raised our hands. And at first it was tolerable, but slowly it started to build up. At lunch, we even sat at a different table. I could feel the other children staring at us. I felt like I was going to burst, and then at recess I did. The teacher made us line up against the wall and watch the other kids play. Even though this was something I'd agreed to and knew I could back out of, I just felt terrible and wanted it to end, so I cried and cried and cried, and they let me back out of the assignment for the rest of the day. I had an assignment in high school 5 years later that made us write a paper about a great lesson we had learned, and I wrote about that day in the 4th grade in the book Number the Stars. I was able to back out of being directly excluded, and it still jolted me. I couldn't even imagine what it was really like for the people in the story, or people in real life who live with oppression every day. It was something that shaped my idea of how people should be treated. So, I don't know, that's a very special letter, but I've heard often from kids and from teachers in schools who have done various projects centering around this book and the beginning of Holocaust studies. This is, I believe, Turkish, and ironically, just within the past year, I've gotten word from teachers there, and I've not been able to do anything about it, that this book has been removed from Turkish schools. Very sad. These are my parents when they're young, and I've forgotten why I put them here, but I bet if I go to the next picture, it will be revealed. Yes. This is my father. He's a much older man, and I put him in here because although the origins of the book, The Giver, are very complicated, and I can tell you that if you go to my website, which is easy to find, and you go to the part called Speeches, there is the acceptance speech for the Newbery Medal for The Giver, and it does describe all the many and complex origins of the book. But the one that I focus on most often has to do with my father. He's not terribly old here, but I don't have a picture of him as an old man. And the time I'm talking about would have been 1991 or 92. He was in a nursing home by then, and I would go down. He was in Virginia, near my brother, but I would go down every 6 weeks or so, fly to Virginia to visit my dad. And my brother and I had created a photograph album. My father's memory was beginning to fade. I don't think he had Alzheimer's, but like many old people, he simply was losing his memory. I'm one of those people now, but he at any rate was in a much worse state. My brother and I had prepared a photograph album filled with old family photographs. And there was a car my father had loved once, and there was a picture of that car there. And I would turn to that picture, and he'd say, best car I ever had. And there were houses we had lived in and people we had known. But in the course of this particular visit of going through that album, there was a picture of myself and my sister, and his face lit up, and he said, "Oh, there you are with your sister." And then he sort of looked embarrassed, and he said, "I can't remember her name." And I said, "She was named Helen, Dad. She was named for her grandmother." And he said, "Whatever happened to her?" And I had to say, "She died, Dad." And for him, because he had forgotten, it was as if it had just happened. And he was devastated. So I turned the pages, and there was another car, a house, whatever. But within just a very few minutes, there are the little girls again. And again he said, with his face lighting up, "Oh, there you are with Helen." And he said, "I can't remember what happened to her." And I had to say again, "She died, Dad." Surely the worst moment of his life, and my mother's, the day that their first child died. But he had forgotten it. And so when I was driving my rental car back to the airport, I began to think, what would it be like if we could control memory and simply obliterate memories of anything that troubles us? And as it happened, I was at that stage in writing that I'd finished a book, delivered it to the publisher, had not yet decided what I would write next. I never have a shortage of ideas, but sometimes it takes me a while to zero in on something to realize, yes, this is what I want to do next. And so driving back and then flying back to Boston, I began to think about that question I'd asked myself, and I decided that's what I would write about. A group of people, town, a country, I wasn't sure, who had found a way to control human memory. And shortly thereafter, of course, I realized that that would be sometime in the future, because we can't now. And so I would be writing a book that would be, science fiction? I never liked science fiction. So I just wrote it as if it were realistic fiction. I didn't worry about any of the science and technology. And therefore, for years and years and years now, kids have written me to ask exactly how it is they control the climate, how do they get long theories from kids about the inner workings of the eye, how they had lost color. And I just tell them, I don't know. You just have to figure that out for yourself. But that's the book that became The Giver. This is the man who's on the cover of The Giver, but this is not the picture of him that I used. This was a man I photographed for a magazine article, and this is the picture I wish I could have used, because I think he has a very benevolent sort of expression on his face here. He was an artist, and I'd written about him for a magazine and photographed him, but he had long since died. But I kept some of the photographs of him because he was such a remarkable man and such a wonderful face. But this one, though I love his old man's hand there, if you look closely, he has a Band-Aid on one finger. And also, the pocket of his shirt has embroidery on it, which he himself had done. If I had this photograph now, well, I do have it now, but if it had been today, if it had been a digital photograph, I could have taken that Band-Aid off very easily. But this photograph was done back in darkroom days, and I would not have been able to do that. And so, even at the time the book was published, I didn't have that capacity. There's his Band-Aid and his ring. And so this was the other photographs that I had, and which we ended up using. Again, it's the book designer that decides how to use the photograph. And so this is what we ended up with. This, I think, has more of a sinister look than the earlier photograph. This is the photograph that I did. I did many photographs of this girl for Gathering Blue. And again, the book designer is the one that cut her in half and tilted her sideways for this book, which follows The Giver. It's not really a sequel to The Giver, but it's set in a different place, but probably in the same time period. And at the end of this book, at the very end, there's reference to a boy. And the boy is Jonas. In the original manuscript, it was named. The person talking says his name is Jonas. The editor asked me to take the name out so that it wouldn't rely too heavily on the previous books.